Sir Simon Rattle. Do you like the Sir, or do you prefer to
It,
do without it?
it always sounds as though someone has a terrible stutter. I loved hearing about Stephen Spender, the poet, when he was in America, saying, "But everybody calls me Suspenders." Anyway, no, please,
Simon.
Simon, yeah. But anything's better than Maestro.
Oh, I don't go.
Nobody does, but in America they really do.
Well, it's
Seriously.
important for those who like that sort of word. That is the sort of word they like, as Jean Brodie said. I want to say 10 years ago was the last time we met in this very room here at the Barbican. At the time, you were firmly ensconced in Berlin with the Philharmonic, but there were tantalising rumours going round the London musical world that you might be persuaded to come home. And now you have come home, so welcome back. How do you find the British musical scene?
Well, look, I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, it's so alive. I mean, the fact that we're always saying the word despite in every sentence, I mean, how it flourishes in the degree it does with the minuscule support it gets is one of the world's miracles. But it's alive and healthy and kicking. The musicians are working like kind of pack dogs, but playing out of their skins. And so it's a pleasure. I mean, this is a country with so many wonderful orchestras, and I'm thrilled to be with this particular group who I really love.
They've traditionally been a very independent-minded group of players. Does that still prevail, or?
Oh, I mean, of course, but after Berlin, this is kind of like Shaun the Sheep. It's, of course they are, but the fact that they have that kind of character also is part of the way they play, because once a concert comes here, however exhausted everybody is, you know that they will give the last drop of blood. And if it was an army, you would say, I mean, there aren't conscripts in this orchestra. This is a group of people who are going to go for it. And this is an amazing support for any conductor to have. They're a real performing bunch.
You very much hit the ground running when you came back to London. Suddenly it was as if you'd never been away.
I'm so sorry about that. Sounds not him again.
I mean that in the nicest possible way. It's really very exciting, because you didn't sort of just dip a toe into the repertoire water. You got going on exciting projects.
Well, look, if you've got an orchestra like this, you actually must, because actually they will do anything. And we've gone from Rameau to music written yesterday, and nothing seems to faze them. If it's new, they sit up and they're interested. If it's old, they attack it with the relish of an old friend.
So what about immediate future plans? I mean, I can't ignore, in this year of grace 2020, Ludwig van Beethoven. How is the LSO commemorating his big anniversary?
Oh, I mean, poor Ludwig. I mean, he'd probably be horrified to think that we were playing so much of his music in this time. He'd kind of wonder, well, don't you have any music of your own? I mean, but he's inescapable for very, very good reasons. And I hope at least we'll find some new perspectives on the pieces. I mean, of course, we are doing some of the big major works, but also, I mean, as we speak today, I will be rehearsing his early oratorio, Christ on the Mount of Olives, which is, I mean, absolutely top drawer of Beethoven. And I simply am perplexed as to why this isn't known. So we do this on the day of the actual birthday. Christian Zimmermann, the great Polish pianist and quasi-lunatic, has agreed, well, not even agreed, he came up with the idea that we would play all the 5 concertos in one concert.
Wow.
I've never known anyone do that before. But he said, we should mark this somehow. and we should really make a journey. And we'll see whether it's physically possible to do.
Well, that's very much in the spirit of Beethoven, isn't it? He did
Well, it
these
is.
mammoth concerts.
They were monster concerts, and of course you remember that they were absolutely up to date contemporary music then, and some of them still are now.
Yeah,
so
the ink still wet on
maybe
the
he
page.
would have enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think he would, because he was a contrary old so-and-so, wasn't he? In
Well,
many
yeah,
ways,
composers often are, but I think he was a special case among all of them. But I had never played a Beethoven symphony with the London Symphony Orchestra, so dealing now with the seventh for the first time, this is such a pleasure, because if you have a group of musicians, you ask politely, do you think you could possibly drive this truck off the top of the mountain? Everybody goes, oh, sure, yes, be interested to see when it hits the bottom, what will happen. And there is absolutely no point in playing Beethoven as a routine of anything, because it just doesn't thank you. It asks, as a singer, it asks for more than anybody can possibly do. But it does of orchestras as well. And people sometimes say to me, oh, this will be one of you know these pieces backwards, this will be a nice, easy year for you. And you have to say, are you kidding? There is no such thing as an easy piece of Beethoven.
one of the most popular pieces, individual movements we play on Classic FM is the opening of his Pastoral Symphony. Because it's beautiful, and because Beethoven himself loved going for long walks in the country, armed with a notebook and a pencil. And the more you listen to it, and I know it very, very well anyway, the more you hear. There's no way of taking a holiday while playing, even that jolly let's go to the country opening movement, because it's so much the woodwind bird calls and all the little details to get nailed.
But it's also, for Beethoven, that's probably the dearest of all the symphonies to me. It's, why do I now have a reason to be alive? When the storm comes, it's really clear that this is not about the weather, that this is also a complete psychological breakdown, and that the finale is not only a thanksgiving that it is finished, but a thanksgiving that he is still alive. As a composer who had written himself out of suicide by writing the Eroica Symphony, the pastoral of all the pieces seems to go deepest to why am I still here when, as a composer, the most important sense I have is gone? How can I deal with life, and how thankful can I be that I've survived? And in this, this kind of little prayer at the end of the pastoral, which is like your kids saying, I love you without kind of artifice, that I'd find almost intolerably moving. And still, here we are, we're celebrating this anniversary, and still he is here speaking to us every day.
Yeah, 250 years
exactly.
Since he himself was born. Now, Beethoven, classical music in general, makes you glad to be alive. It has that unique capacity to help you think of things that you can't put into words. But a lot of people these days are keen on portraying it as elitist, for the middle classes, for the middle-aged and older. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with being middle-aged myself.
Well,
because it's too late.
If we're lucky enough, it's going to happen to all of us. But I'm still waiting to grow up, of course. But
that's another story. But I know that you're absolutely passionate about music education. What sort of plans do you have for the LSO? I was hearing about your work with the East London Academy this morning.
Well, there's many reasons to want to come and work here, but the fact that this was one of the trailblazers in education 30 years ago, the orchestra, is a particular draw. And a large majority of the orchestra are involved in education work, and often under the radar. For years they've been working in the 10 poorest boroughs in London. If all the orchestras in London did this, we could cover the bunch of them, but that's another story. But one of the things we've been talking about ever since we first kind of got together 5 years ago was, what do you do, first of all, for this gap between children? How do you get over the teenage years, which is what any parent will have said anyway. But how do you keep the music going there? How do you make sure that musicians on a stage actually look like the diversity of the city they work in? How do you do this? How do you get people who don't have the normal advantages through? So the East London Academy is an idea to find, rather than some of the other programs which are really dealing with all children, musically gifted or not, this is to try and help the people who might have music actually as their life, and to get them through these years, and to help teach them and to really support them and to challenge them. And it started, and I've met the group, and they're wonderful kids, and I'm so excited actually to hear what kind of music comes out of them. But it's typical of this orchestra that they will see, okay, there's a problem, what can we do to solve this, rather than sitting on the laurels. And the world is full of amazingly musically talented people, but they don't necessarily always know it, or necessarily have the possibility of financially doing it. This should not be a middle class profession in any way, neither the musicians nor the audiences, but it's just a matter of reaching everybody and making sure everybody can get infected by this incurable virus. I mean, this is an illness we want everyone to have. And there is absolutely no reason why this should be for any kind of elite. And actually, how dare they say that? I mean, this is great art. It's like saying that people aren't worthy of the greatest art. Of course they are. It talks to everybody. But you need to give people a chance to actually hear it and experience it. Of course.
Well, going back to when you were a lad in Liverpool, when did you first catch the disease? Was there a moment, a concert, a piece of music that made you think, wow, this is it?
I think my parents bought me a drum kit when I was really very little, and the Skins, the first lot of Skins went within a week, and I think my parents were praying I'd never take up music if this was what it was going to be like.
And then the neighbours moved out.
Yes, I mean, neighbours moved out on one side with stunning regularity until we found there was a policeman who did the night shift who was an amateur trombonist, and finally I'd met my match. I mean, he was the only one who stayed for years. But I suppose first going to hear the Merseyside Youth Orchestra, age 9, and looking at Alan Fearon on the timpani.
Alan Fearon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure this is a name.
A great player and a great educator.
Absolutely, too. And the chorus master up in Newcastle. Looking at him, thinking, I want to be there. Very simple. But then I was in and out of the Liverpool Phil all the time. Not the pub, I have to assure you, at that age, but. I was sneaking into rehearsals all the time, and fine. Eventually the doorkeepers just used to kind of help me to find the quietest way in. But I had this possibility of just going to hear this, and I was given a scholarship so that I could actually be. My parents wouldn't have been able to have me taught piano, violin, and percussion. I mean, they couldn't. One of them they could have done, but not all three. And I was a typical scholarship kid in that way, and it was at the time of the great flowering of youth orchestras all over the place. And countless people came out of the Merseyside Youth Orchestra all over the world, and I think I'd found the lake I could swim in.
What was the first piece you played with the Merseyside Youth Orchestra?
Oh, good question. I mean, I was 10. I mean, I have this memory of Bill Jenkins, the wonderful Welsh conductor there, always conducting Charlie McKerris's arrangement of Sullivan's music called Pineapple Poll. I mean, this seemed to be his absolute favourite thing. So somewhere I have that in mind. But, you know, we played such a kind of extraordinary variety of things. And it's funny, I was 10 going in there, much younger than anybody else. But by the time I was 17, they'd appointed me conductor of there. So we were doing the Berlioz Fantastic Symphony, the Stravinsky Rite of Spring. I mean, no, you name it. I mean, of course, from 10 to 17 seemed like about 3 lifetimes to me, but I realise now this was just a few minutes.
What a wonderful apprenticeship. So
Well, to be given that opportunity, that young, and I was already down in London at the Royal Academy, but to go back every weekend and to know I had that, I mean, how lucky was I?
Well, staying with pieces of music, you have drunk and eaten the great repertoire since you were 9. So there's very little that you don't know. A lot of people, I find, Classic FM listeners are a discerning bunch, and they get in touch often with very pertinent inquiries,
of course,
and suggestions of their own. But I know that a lot of people get quite intimidated by the sheer magnitude of what to listen to next.
And it's a problem because everything is so much more available than it was. I was hard to believe that YouTube only started in 2005, or Spotify or Idagio, whatever it is. And there is this just enormous jungle of
Where
things.
do you go? So,
yeah, you know, as a kid, I went to concerts and it was kind of decided for me. And then, you know, I would get whatever was there. But now the choice is just... it's so gigantic.
Well, can I pin you down, not in a Desert Island Disc sort of way, but a couple of pieces of music that you would really recommend for somebody who's heard the hits? They know the big mega classics, but if they want to go exploring a bit more, where would you send them?
But what kind of area are you talking about?
Let's think of late Romantic orchestral music, which is so popular with just about everybody in the world. You've heard Rachmaninoff Paganini variations. You love the Second Symphony and the Second Piano Concerto. What else has Rachmaninoff written that might really turn the light on?
Well, there are 2 pieces in particular. One is, it's a vocal piece called The Bells, which is about bells, 4 movements about bells in different seasons. And staggering beauty and drama. And it's only when you reach the end of it that you cotton on to the fact that he's actually talking about a person's life and what, from birth to death, and what does that mean? And it's interesting because, Rachmaninoff, often you think of him as this big, indulgent outpouring of romanticism, but he was also an incredibly controlled and intelligent composer. In earlier pieces of his, there is a melody at the very end of the bells, which actually comes on the last 2 pages of the score. And it's over in about 20 seconds. And it just simply, it's staggering and it stays with you. At another time of his life, he would have played it and played it and played it. But there, it's like a summing up of a whole person's life. I would really recommend that piece.
Okay.
And funny to think about Rachmaninoff, because we think of him as this big swooning Russian romantic, but I mean, not only a great pianist, but apparently a stunningly great conductor. When I used to work in Boston with the Boston Symphony a lot, I went back into their archives and discovered that at the turn of the century, they were trying to get Rachmaninoff to be their principal conductor because they felt he was the greatest Mozart conductor they had ever come across.
Wasn't expecting to hear that.
No, absolutely, but when you hear him play and you look at the pieces, you realise what an extraordinary discipline there was. And he had this experience of being basically a refugee in America, where the new music was happening and he was felt to be desperately out of date, but was still writing these wonderful, strong pieces. I mean, the symphonic dances right from the end of his life is one of the great orchestral showpieces, and again a piece with an immense amount of darkness and passion within it. But it was going on at the same time. Alban Berg had already died. It was in the middle of the modern music. But the wonderful thing about music is that there are always all these different styles going on at the same time. There should be no one way in which you can compose.
And there should be no one way in which to conduct. This brings me on to a very big question, which is possibly going to seem rather rude. I shall have to phrase it correctly. I have a show every Sunday night on Classic FM called Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Classical Music, which does not pretend to be encyclopedic, because I don't know everything by any means. It's more a little sort of dig into the interesting byways, sometimes musical, sometimes technical, sometimes biographical or emotional, to how the great music that we love is created. And a lot of ideas for programmes are suggested by listeners. And one of the most perennial questions over the 6 years the show has been running is, what does a conductor actually do? So I'm going to ask you, with the cheek of the devil, Sir Simon Rattle, what do you do?
Well, on the face of it, it's one of the great fake professions, because there are all these musicians and there is this, hopefully, a silent person in front of them. What is he doing? What is he or she doing? Please. It's very interesting. As a student in the academy, Maurice Miles had 10 of us in the conducting class altogether. And one day he said, now what you're going to do is go in front of the orchestra. All 10 of you are going to play the opening bars of the same piece. You're not going to say anything. You're just going to stand there and conduct it. And this was a student orchestra and with very inexperienced student conductors. And the first thing that we all noticed is the orchestra sounded entirely different with every person in front of them. Now, how does one explain that? What is that? I mean, we know. I know that if I play on this piano, it'll sound like a, collection of skeletons, bones, rubbing against each other. If a man or axe comes and sits on it, the first chord will sound like somebody put kind of silk through a gold ring. It'll go whoosh. I mean, how does this happen? I mean, we know it happens with instruments. We know every singer has a different voice, but every conductor makes a difference, even to the basic sound an orchestra makes. Of course, I mean, all music aspires to be, if it's not singing, it aspires to be chamber music. A string quartet is almost the ideal form of concerted music, but the ideal orchestra is just a gigantic overblown string quartet where everybody is listening to each other, but with the best will in the world. There is almost never time for an orchestra to make and agree their own interpretation of everything. And if they do it, it's such an unwieldy group of people that you are basically stuck with whatever you decide. And the most exciting thing about conducting an orchestra and playing an orchestra is that every night is completely different. You have the same things to pack into the suitcase, but they go in different orders, they go in different ways. And people can have ideas, not only the conductor, the players can have ideas which can come in, and then everybody has to find a way of making it work. In a way, I would love to be Jürgen Klopp, but just with hand gestures. But if he could do what he's doing to that team, and actually do it on the spur of the moment with his hands, you would have an idea of what our job is, because it's very clear what an extraordinary difference he made to that group of people. And my God, must there be some ego management in there? But it's done with love and thought and care and intelligence. And he would be a model to any of us who are trying to organise large things. I wish a few politicians on all sides would just go and take a masterclass from him. But in a way, we are doing the same job. We are trying to inspire these extraordinary people to do their very, very best. Because at the end of it all, they are playing it. Oh no, you can't. I can't pretend I am playing it. I can make it better or worse, but actually they are playing, and it's my job to enable. And it's my job to try and translate what the composer is saying to the orchestra and then the audience. In some ways, it's almost like an adapter plug in the wall. It should go through you. And one of the things I most miss about my beloved friend and colleague Maris Janssens, who died recently, is that you go to his concerts and he would almost disappear in it. You just think, oh yes, this is just exactly how I wanted to hear this music. But he would disappear into the music enough that you heard the music. I mean, it's a very long way round of saying what it is we do.
But I'm already fantasizing about a regular television series or radio series, instead of Match of the Day, Concert of the Day, with pundits, you know.
It would be something. Yeah. I mean, thank God we don't have to score.
Going for that
thank God we don't have to score goals every time. I mean, whether we could live with that kind of pressure, I don't know.
We're into the third movement now, and they've got it all to do. You know what I mean?
But it is to do. I mean, an orchestra. I mean, thank goodness a football team isn't 100 people, but everybody does depend on each other, and you see what this is. And as a conductor, of course, I can get to know profound things about people without even necessarily knowing their names. Yeah. There is something about the connection that you make when making music that goes beyond any normal social interaction.
Well, in the best possible way, music, there's nowhere to hide when you're really expressing music.
No, and you should be telling the truth, and the music insists on it. If I open up a Beethoven symphony, we were about to do the Beethoven 9th symphony shortly, the score looks up at you and says, are you ready for this? Are you really going to do this?
And you'd better be.
Can you cope with this? And will you be as devastatingly honest as the composer is? And won't let you away with anything less. I'm sorry, it sounds like Sood's Corner from Private Eye, but it is true. And the music still speaks to you through these pages. It's a strange thing, because people forget that you can go to an art gallery and you can get Van Gogh or Mark Rothko direct, but the music, most people can't look at a score and have the music speak. We are actually forced to interpret
the filters, yes.
And we better be honest.
2 more questions. What do you do in downtime, as it's now called? Do you listen to music or do you avoid it? And do you sometimes find when you're listening to a new piece that you go into work mode when you should perhaps be in relax mode?
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem for musicians because you are doing it all all the time. I mean, I have three young children, so the concept
there is
of
no such thing as
the
downtime.
concept of downtime is something in science fiction that you can imagine. I mean, the listening to music. I mean, I, like a lot of musicians, tend to listen to jazz to relax rather than our own music. And I get an awful lot of kind of rap and house music from my kids, and every now and then I can, oh, that's interesting. Oh, but why have they now just done it 1,000 times the same thing? But still, you get a bit of that. But there is a danger that if you listen to something, you start thinking about it and start analysing it. But it's easier for me, for instance, to go and hear a string quartet. That if I see a conductor, I'm immediately watching it. If it's a great performance, then I will forget that. But look, but this is one of the things. On the other hand, we get to deal with this extraordinary kind of volcano of intelligence and emotion every day, and it's the emotional payback it gives you is enormous. But there is the problem that maybe it's not relaxing in that same way. We'll do other things.
Well,
yes,
you
but
don't need to be that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're relaxed.
I'm more
anyway.
relaxed watching football than going to a concert.
Okay. One last question. Last week saw the launch here, I believe, of or LSO St Luke's. I'm not quite sure where the venue was, but it saw the launch of your new recording of the Elgar Cello Concerto with Sheku Kane-Mason.
I mean, this is really interesting because everybody thinks of young musicians in terms of kind of extraordinary extroversion and energy, or whatever.
And the Sheku effect that's now
but in
people.
fact, of all the cellists I've played this piece with, and they've been a few, he is the most inward. And it seems to me to be a very appropriate look at this piece, which is, I mean, it was really the last great piece Elgar wrote. And of course it's after the First World War, but of course it's also the death of his wife. It's also his feeling of, do I belong in the world? And of course, there are extraordinary forthright things in it, but a lot of it is very inward. And you only have to look at pictures of Elgar, even when he has kind of dressed himself up as a great English gentleman. He never felt quite at home, and you only have to look at the haunted eyes to realise how easily damaged this person was. I mean, of course, he was able to write Land of Hope and Glory, the Pomp and Circumstances March, but the true Elgar was this rather desperate, damaged person. Probably, if he had been Middle European, he would have been Mahler. He would have been a full-blown neurotic. He was very British, so it was within. And the haunted eyes are what we all felt Sheku really got. And this is wonderful. I mean, nobody is pretending that this will be the last word on this concerto, or even his last word. Hopefully, he'll be playing it for the next 60 years.
Well, that was what's so exciting about the performance. He's 20. This is how he feels about it now. And it captures a moment in his life as well as the work.
But the inner sense of stillness and the concentration and poetry and humility of Sheku is really in there. I mean, we were just all mightily impressed. And I suspect this is an orchestra that's not easily impressed, generous as though they are. But also, it was done in a day, as these recordings are, and certain things he had to do again and again and again and again, as one does. And there was never a moment from him, this was always positive, concentrated, and for the music. And to see his entire family sitting up there listening was also really touching, because you realise what a support system is that. And how wonderful to have a family like that. All musicians. No, that was an honour to do. And wonderfully, we'll, in next season, I'll do the big birthday anniversary concert with the CBSO, my own old orchestra in Birmingham. And we'll play the first concert that the orchestra played, which was conducted by Elgar. And among it was the cello concerto, which was then, of course, a very new piece. This was 1920, and Sheku will play. And so that will be a very touching meeting of families. My God, I started as conductor of the CBSO so long before he was born. Let's not even go there. Yeah.
But I'm getting the impression, Simon Rattle, that you have the highest boredom threshold of just about anyone I've met. I mean, you continue to be absolutely consumed by this great music and will go on discovering.
I mean, let's all remain curious. And what a privilege to be in this work, to be doing what we love that much. Simple as that.